Hello, Tarnished. Who was that guy? Did no one tell him there was an elevator?
The DLC is finally out after 2 years. Damn, you could make a whole other game in that time. Now I know your attention span is extremely small, so that is why I have this amazing review in the back. Ironically, I was working on the review for the Sonic Frontiers DLC, but then I decided I wanted at least one of my videos to come out somewhat near the release of the content I'm reviewing. Of course, who knows if this will come out in time or not. I'm not good at time management, and I also have a job. Unlike you. Anyway, if you haven't watched the original video on Elden Ring, you should go and watch that. And if you haven't played Elden Ring, why are you here? And of course, massive spoiler warning right off the bat. If you don't leave in 10 seconds, I will spoil the final boss for you. Don't believe me? You've been warned. 10, 9, 8.
It's Radahn! It's Radahn! The final boss is Radahn! He steals people, he's a bad guy. He steals people's hearts in order to mind control them. And he mind controlled Moog, which means Moog beat the allegations.
Oh wow, good for him. So I'm going to structure this review a little differently from the original, as this is obviously on a smaller scale. I'll still be using my patent-pending ranking system from S to F. Here's the explanation on what each rank means, if you didn't already know. Then I will use this to rank each category of the game. I'll start with the weapons added, then move on to the spells, items, and summons. Then I'm going to talk about the open world as a whole, and then talk about the enemies separate. Then I'll move on to the dungeons, then the side quests, and then the final boss. Hopefully this is a little more digestible than the first review, as I realized maybe making half of the entire video just bosses was a little excessive. But before we get on to Shadow of the Erdtree, I do want to start by talking about some of the adjustments and changes that were made to the base game through some updates. So, let's get started.
While it's not a recent addition, I do want to briefly mention the new PvP Coliseums that were added. Now, I actually made a video on these, but that video is honestly really shit, so I'm talking about it here. Now, the concept of them is pretty simple and was asked for by fans, so I'm not surprised it was added. PvP in the base game wasn't very accessible, as you had to invade players doing co-op. But now these Coliseum doors are unlocked and each one has different game modes to play. Obviously you have your one-on-one battles, but you can also choose team battles and free-for-alls. I never found one-on-one fights in Souls games to be very fun, as it just feels like you stay in a stalemate without being able to hit each other for like 90% of the match, only to get one shot whenever someone finally does get hit. The team and free-for-all matches, on the other hand, are much more fun, as you're trying to go for a score on how many kills you can get, and you respawn whenever you die. So the extremely high damage you do to other players is a lot more balanced and fun, since dying isn't an immediate loss. Plus, the general chaos of this many people fighting also allows for way more applicable strategies, since everyone is going to be multitasking and can't just dodge roll everything you do. So yeah, overall this edition makes the PvP pretty fun, so it gets an A from me. Now, on to more recent additions that the DLC update added. New hair options were added, which doesn't sound that important, but they added dreadlocks, and you would be shocked at how happy this makes me. I may have a type. A new tab was added to the inventory that shows all your most recently obtained items. I mentioned in the last video you could organize the inventory like this already, but you had to do it within each tab of the inventory, and so it was just really slow and annoying. This is a whole separate section that just shows the last 30 or so items you've picked up, no matter what type of item they are. In the same vein, an exclamation point was added to any item you have picked up but haven't highlighted yet, so when you go to equip that new weapon you just picked up, it's super easy to see. A simple change, but a huge quality of life improvement. Let's see here, they also added the ability to summon the Spectral Steed in the Elden Beast arena. What?!
Yes! Let's go, Torrent! Yeah, that's right, you can't get away from me now, bitch! Fuck! Oh, you better get ready. I'm gonna get you this time. Shit!
Okay, but unironically, this does help a lot with this fight, because when he constantly runs away from you 40 miles away, you can actually reach him. Now, is this kind of a band-aid solution to what's just a poorly designed fight? Yeah. But, I mean, you know, it's better than nothing. I don't know why it took them 2 years to add it, but, I mean, you know, the fight's, like, tolerable now. So the Radahn Elden Beast fight, it gets bumped up from a D to, like, a C-. Whatever. I gotta go meet some twink in the Shadow Realm. See ya later. Base Elden Ring already had a massive selection of weapons, but of course the DLC has added a ton new ones as well. What I'm surprised about is how many completely unique movesets were made for this DLC. There are plenty of weapons with the same moveset as the main game, of course, and all of those are still good, especially with all the new Ashes of War, which I'll get to soon. But I want to go over these new movesets specifically for a second. Light greatswords are greatswords, but with class. The moveset is much more elegant with attacks that flow together seamlessly. The way your character uses the momentum of each swing to spin into the next feels like it has real weight, while still being fairly fast. And this weapon has unique follow-ups to certain combos, such as the strong attack into the light attack. Most weapons would just use the second swing of the light attack combo, but the light greatswords use the heavier momentum from the swing to spin around and do a much quicker light attack than if you were to just do a normal 1-2 combo of the light attack itself. Backhand blades are another very elegant choice, but are much faster and favor dual wielding. These blades also have unique properties, like being able to continuously sprint while attacking, and attacks send you a good distance forward towards where you are attacking.
And they have a unique backstab animation!
Perfume bottles were originally limited use consumables, but the DLC now has a new weapon variant, with unlimited uses at the cost of their range. These weapons aren't quite as universally useful as the last two, but they are very creative and they can be extremely powerful under the right circumstances.
Oh my god, though. Holy shit.
Great katanas are slower, stronger katanas. Who would have guessed? With a moveset that reminds me of the Dark Souls 1 curved greatsword. The difference being that these are actually worth using. Thrusting shields are able to block while attacking, but only during certain parts of the animation. And attacks to you will still do chip damage, so it isn't too overpowered. Honestly, it feels like a properly implemented version of some of those old shields from Dark Souls. You can even learn martial arts, which utilize kicks and spins instead of just basic punches. They added so many new weapon types, and somehow all of them are good. I mean, there's a whole subset of weapons you can just throw. And every weapon that does reuse base game moves has at least something unique about it. Certain weapons like the Death Knight's Great Axe have a unique strong attack, and almost every weapon has a unique Ash of War ability. I noticed there are also more weapons that have intelligence, faith, hybrid scaling, making those types of builds way more viable than before. And honestly, I really enjoy using a lot of these weapons that have this type of scaling, which I can't really say for the base game.
Yeah, that's right, you like getting fingered, don't you?
Wait, that's not what I meant! The Ashes of War continue to be as useful as the base game, but they also evolve upon a lot of those concepts and introduce new functionalities for them. For example, I love moves that give you an evasive action before the attack. Blind Spot is much better than Quickstep for circling enemies, and the Blink Bolt is a great gap closer. The new Ashes of War also utilize the brand new weapon strengths, along with enhancing old weapons. Lots of moves that were in the base game but couldn't be used by the player have been added, such as the Crucible Knight's wings or Radahn's gravity flying spin. And we even got some improved version of some of the best Ashes of War in the original game, such as the Lion's Claw or the Frost Stomp. Experimenting with all the new abilities is probably the most fun you can have ever, I think. And I really have no complaints with the DLC Ashes of War or the weapons. Obviously, if I want to be a little nitpicky, there are a couple weapons that are a little stinky, and not every Ash of War is equally as useful as another. But there's just so much new added that was good, that I think it would be impossible to not find at least something here that you will find fun and fits with your playstyle and build. Plus, with how fresh and creative all the new moves are, I can't give the weapons anything other than an S. I will get to the new consumables and magic shortly, but I want to start with the most important item added to the DLC. The Erdtree fragments.
What the hell's a Erdtree?
Also known as the Erdtree fragments. These items are basically an additional leveling system to increase your stats beyond the endgame. Functionally, they are very simple. You find some in the open world, and when you use them at the Grace, you get a small boost in damage and defense. And as simple as it is, I do think it is a genius setup to allow the DLC to be much more expansive by allowing you to progressively get stronger just like you would in the normal game. Previous Souls DLCs are usually just short enough in length that it's not really that important to have any consideration towards leveling up, as everything could just be leveled towards endgame. Another aspect that makes this work is the upgrades only work in the DLC itself. The bonus stats are taken away once you warp back to the original map, so your character won't be too overpowered when you get there. My only gripe is that for some reason there are only exactly enough fragments to upgrade to max, when the base game and previous games for things like this would have extra for you to collect so you don't have to get every single one. Like with the seeds to upgrade your flask, for example. Like, look at how many are falling from the tree. You're telling me only 50 landed here? Spirit Ashes also function in an identical way, but instead boost the stats of Torrent and your summons. I also like that it implies that Torrent can do damage, which he can't. He's completely useless. Now let's move on to the consumables, as one of the first items you'll probably pick up is a good old cookbook. The recipe? Bigger Firebomb! No joke, most of the new items in this game are just giant or hefty versions of the base game throwables, and I love it. They are so big, and they do so much damage! Of course, big fat balls aren't the only thing added.
That's what she said.
Some regular-sized pots include the Frenzy Flame Pot and the Eternal Sleep Pot. Frenzy Pot, it does what you think, but the Eternal Sleep, that sounds interesting. It's basically the same as the normal sleep effect, but it doesn't wear off whenever you hit the enemy. It only wears off whenever enough time goes by. So now the Gotskin duo is even easier. You also get a lot of stronger versions of old items, which is all good, but the DLC unfortunately continues the trend of just too many items. I think the reason that no one uses consumables very much is because the amount of items is so overwhelming. I also don't like the idea of a cookbook serving as the main reward for an obstacle, especially when they only give you one recipe. Though a Dark Souls fan favorite that was missing from Elden Ring has been brought back. I don't know if it's actually a fan favorite, I didn't check. Marika's Bathwater, which is functionally identical to Dark Souls' Divine Blessing. A full heal that's so rare, you'll never actually use it out of fear of wasting it. Talismans have some expected and unexpected additions. The most unsurprising but still welcomed and useful are stronger variants of the base game talismans. They also finally added a talisman that just increases arcane. Thank you. But there are many with much more unique and specific effects. Like the talisman that increases two-handed weapon damage, so you can truly make the world's strongest guy. A talisman that increases damage after a summon dies can make other summons more useful, specifically the ones that weren't useful. Some talismans, though, are weirdly specific, like making specific Ashes of War where you hold a stance before attacking stronger. Which I tried it on Rellana's sword, since that's what the talisman suggests is one that would count. And like, I see the buff visual come up, but I swear the damage did not change. Of course, I welcome the more specific talisman abilities as it allows for even more build variety, but there is definitely a discrepancy in the usefulness of some, like raising the strength of magma spells. The magma spells suck ass, no one's gonna use this. But on the other hand, ones like increasing your iframes on a backstep or boosting damage to rolling attacks are useful for a lot of different builds. So it is a mixed bag, but I at least appreciate the experimentation. Now, onto our new array of spells. Incantations stick with the theming of the base game, mostly lightning and holy abilities, with a few blood and dragon spells thrown in. I do wish there were more arcane-based spells, as there is only like one blood spell and a couple dragon spells. Existing spell groups have been expanded upon, so the specific seals that buff those spells now have more spells they can buff. The brand new seals that were added, however, still have pretty limited use. Like Messmer incantations are cool, but there are only 3, so his seal isn't really worth using over any other seal. The new sorcery staff fares a little better though, as we finally have a staff that can cast every kind of spell. It really is Dark Souls 2 2. Or is it Dark Souls 2 3? And it scales with both faith and intelligence, so again, that build is way more viable now. When it comes to the spells themselves, I can say that again, the creativity and experimentation is welcome, but with that comes some hits and some misses. Multi-layered Rings of Light is the perfected version of the Light Ring spells, making it one of the best range attacks in the game, and slow powerful spells like Messmer's Orb send you into the air before attacking, making it good to counter certain enemies. Giant AoEs are also always fun, even if they do need a little more poise. Bale's Lightning takes way too long to charge and has terrible tracking, making the damage not worth it, and a lot of small holy projectiles simply just don't have enough damage or range for me to want to use them. When it comes to sorceries, I do think they managed to vary your options a little better, so every spell isn't just a slightly stronger glintstone projectile. All of the gravity spells are great for groups of enemies, and Impenetrable Thorns is hilariously overpowered compared to the other thorn spells in the main game. Finger spells have projectiles that track enemies at the cost of range, so again you get more of a different use even though it's still a projectile than just the normal glintstone pebble. The biggest disappointments are the Putrescent spells, as they cost way too much FP to be worth using. So while not every spell is perfect, the ones that are good really shine, as I found towards the end of my playthrough, I was using nearly exclusively DLC spells. We also have a new selection of physic tiers. An insane decision by FromSoft was for the first one you get to be the Sekiro Deflect tier. It literally gives you the deflect from that game, but with a baby bitch version of the sound effect. It's very strange to make this a temporary ability, but at the same time I know it would be giga overpowered if it was a permanent one, as it just is a completely different combat mechanic than what this game is built for. I respect the idea, but also it doesn't make any sense why they added it. There aren't too many other tiers added, and most of them are more situational than the base game ones, but that doesn't make them bad. One gives you infinite stamina, so combining that with the infinite magic, there has to be some crazy builds utilizing that. The Sapping tier does what Melania's Great Rune should have done, which is restore health on hit without nerfing anything else. The Oil tier, well, it oils you up. And the Blood-Sucking tier gives you extra damage at the cost of draining HP. I'm sure the one-shot builds are gonna love this one. I think most of the physics are really good, just don't use these two, like, ever. 5 out of 8 isn't bad though. Actually, is it? What's the math on that? As I said before, Spirit Summons can now be strengthened beyond +10 using the Spirit Ashes. Not much has changed in how summons work, which isn't surprising, but there are some fun new additions if you are someone who likes to use them. Like my boy Telu! Or the Finger Creeper. While the quality fluctuates quite a bit, I can say that there's still a lot of fun and powerful options for spells and items in the DLC. My biggest complaint is the overabundance of consumables, and only about half of the spells are really strong enough to be worth using. But if you are willing to do a bit of searching, it's still very possible to find really good options. So I think that the items and spells deserve a B.
I've been here. It looks familiar. Or have I? Maybe. Oh, maybe not. Huh. I'm not sure. Are you laughing at me? Huh?
Exploring is the name of the game. Well, actually, it's named Elden Ring, but I meant it more as a metaphor. And I feel like I didn't give it the attention it deserved in my original Elden Ring video. So this time, I want to delve deeper into each location. The DLC world is still surprisingly huge, so I'm going to try to separate it into sections. This map isn't as evenly divided as the base game was, so there may be some overlap in points I make across each segment. Now, let's start at the beginning. I love the darker tone of this opening area. It feels like a dirty version of Limgrave, with its much more brown color palette, and yet somehow it still manages to feel so vibrant and colorful. The general vibe fits the theming of the Shadowlands being a place where death washes up. The shadow tree in the distance, while still beautiful, is obviously much more eerie and menacing than the bright light of the Erdtree. You can even see a literal veil over the sky, representing the magical veil Marika used to seal away the Shadowlands. I've been here for 5 seconds and the world design is already peak. Of course, they have to start with you exiting a cave into the amazing view, with the shadow tree as the center point you can see from everywhere. You're given a couple landmarks from the get-go to go check out. The ruined town close by introduces you to the Hefty Pots, and a talisman can be found at the topmost building. From there, you may either head down to the church to get your first Shadow Tree fragment, or the more compelling option, which is the giant Wicker Man spewing flames everywhere. Love the set piece, but boy are these fuckers tedious to fight. They do drop the new physic tier though, which gives you a consistent objective to look for. For the start, there's a lot of landmarks and locations to pique your interest, just like the first game, and it keeps going from this point. You then get like a huge gate, a lake, or a castle to go to next. And I think the game hides its linearity better compared to the first game, since the castle is the obvious main objective, but there are many other ways to go that feel equally as important. It helps make the map feel like one giant location, rather than obviously segmented zones. Being able to see areas in the distance that are just so high above you, or deep below you, gives a great way to encourage exploring. Size of Limgrave, my ass. One problem I already noticed early on though is outside of the Wickerman, there aren't really any consistent landmarks that lead to a certain reward. The Shadow Tree fragment, for example, while they are pretty consistently found by these crosses, they can also be found basically anywhere. You can find them as a pickup in the middle of a legacy dungeon, a drop from these shadow men holding pots, or like a drop from a mini-boss. I think exploring is a lot more encouraged and rewarding when you establish early on what things you will get at what places. Sure, you want to surprise the player with new things, but that needs to be mixed in with some familiarity as to not overwhelm the player. It doesn't have to be a strictly set item that appears at every location, just like a pool of items that fit with one another. For example, what if ruined towns always had cookbooks and consumables, and maybe the churches would always have like a spell, something consistent. Another problem is the first field boss you will most likely fight is the Ghost Flame Dragon. While he has a slightly altered moveset from the regular game's dragons, it's fundamentally just another dragon, which is very disappointing as a first boss. I'll talk about it more soon, but there is a trend of this DLC reusing base game bosses as field bosses. And I don't think I need to explain why that's annoying. So far, weapons are also just found in the middle of nowhere on random corpses. The backhand blade, for example, is found by this grave structure, which doesn't look important enough to be housing a brand new weapon. And the great katana is even worse, it's just in the middle of the lake where the dragon is. And it looks like a normal white item. The item rarity in this game is shown between white, purple, and gold. Why isn't it a purple item? It's a weapon. It's a completely new weapon. It's really good. It should be purple and way easier to see. You can barely see it in the water. And this is another trend that will continue, sadly. So while the visual presentation is very pretty and evokes some exploration, mechanically this falls a little bit short of the standards set in the lands between. Inconsistent landmarks and rewards and annoying field bosses are not a good start. The only major improvement is the layout of the map, which gives a better sense of one giant world. This is probably the biggest section of the map that also serves as a sort of center point that connects to almost every other area. While I do still think the lack of consistent rewards is a problem, there is even more to see and go check out. I'll give this area a little more credit in that sometimes the reward for being thorough is a secret path to a completely new section of the map. I love how much interconnectivity there is between the different regions. A cave beneath a ruined town connects to the lower eastern portion, which even leads to a side entrance of one of the main legacy dungeons, Shadow Keep. Another cave can take you down to the canyon northeast, which has a whole different set of enemies and scenery. There's even a secret into this area that leads from Gravesite Plains. The amount of secret paths you can find that connect to different sections of the map is really fun to discover. But when you are heading towards these different distinctive paths, there isn't a whole lot in between. Not many enemies or field bosses, and when they are there, it's a damn dragon again! When there is something, it tends to be a single item with nothing around it. Some items are so obscure to find, like larval tears, which are only collectible at night, so you basically just have to get lucky if you want to find it naturally. And I'm not saying the amount of content is the problem. There's plenty of stuff to find and do, but if this is what you have, the map should have been made smaller.
A portal! No!
It's okay. It's okay. It's the only one in the DLC, thankfully. Plus, I think you can get here without it, so it doesn't lead to any lazy, disconnected areas. Whew! There is a small fort located in the south that's sort of an in-between of a legacy dungeon and a regular dungeon. Although actually, with how much bigger the dungeons are in this DLC, it's more of a mini dungeon. It serves its purpose well as a change of pace, and has everything I expect from a mini-dungeon, such as a variety of enemies, items, and a mini-boss. Around here is also one of the first instances of a locked spirit spring. In order to use the spring to launch up, you need to find and break a rock that's connected to it in order to unlock it. I appreciate that the first couple are easy to find, so you know what to look for. Honestly, an underutilized mechanic for exploration, as there aren't many after this. Going back up north to the Shadow Keep dungeon, while not only having 2 entrances, it also has multiple exits that lead to the northern parts of the map. As cool as it is to have this one dungeon connect out so many ways, the north section showcases some of the problems I have with the map a lot clearer. I've talked about the lack of consistent rewards, but there's also a lack of consistency and quality of reward based on the importance of the location. This massive gate on the very edge of the cliff that looks super important, and you have to beat a boss to get to, what does it give you? 5 Shadow Tree fragments. The thing you've been finding in the most random ass places, and that's what you put here? Not like a special spell or weapon, I don't know. Then we have the northeastern part, which looks the most intriguing based on the map. And okay, I'll give it some credit once again. They're allowed to give this area, this one area, this much room with not much in it. The calming version of the main theme, the tiny Erdtree in the center, which gives you a spell, and there's a Holy Resist talisman in the back. This is Marika's home village, and with how beautiful the scenery is, and with how important this area is to the story, it's allowed to be this empty. But this is the exception. You see this bullshit over here? Looks pretty important to me. What's in it?
No, no, no.
Nothing! There's fucking nothing! The only thing here other than these leeches is a talent. Don't put your mouth on that. And the only other thing is those bodies from the mausoleums that let you dupe remembrances. Which are like impossible to see, by the way, because they blend in with the environment and they don't look like anything special. And then there's a tiny hole that leads to a giant finger creeper that gives you a shitty ass summon. I don't know what George's obsession with fingering was when he wrote this, but damn did it spawn some uniquely surreal environments. Looks are deceiving though in this DLC. The environment being a great set piece isn't an excuse to put nothing in it. I expected like at least a mini boss or something, come on. The area also reuses more base game mini bosses as well. The Tree Sentinel is a perfectly fine field boss, but brother, you don't think you already used enough of those? Let's see, what's over here at...
Kill yourself!
Anyway, I've complained enough. I don't want to imply that I didn't enjoy my time exploring this area, because the variety in paths and visuals is great. I'm mostly just disappointed that we've downgraded in map design. The empty areas and lackluster rewards for major areas is what really brings it down. Now, for another beautiful area with not a lot of substance. I like the initial journey of following the river down into this expansive canyon and coming out the other side to this view. Moving forward shows a pretty empty field of bright blue flowers.
Okay, that's it. Fuck you. I'm not waiting. Ghost Flame Dragon review right now.
As I mentioned before, this fight is a very blatant reskin of the dragons from the base game. I didn't hate the dragons, but they just didn't offer anything particularly special that made me want to fight them. The head is slightly too off the ground, so it's hard to hit. They have a pretty limited moveset, and they can fly away sometimes, and it's just annoying to chase them down. All of these problems are still present in the Ghost Flame variant, and yet somehow, every change that they did makes the fight worse. All of their stomps now cause a shockwave of fire to spread, which is very difficult to dodge correctly because of the terrible camera and the weird hitbox. Sometimes I get hit and I feel like I shouldn't have, and then other times I don't get hit and it looks like the fire went right through me. All of the dragon's attacks are also generally more sudden than the regular versions, but they are fundamentally just the same animation. They just sped up certain parts of it to make it more confusing. The spread of his fire breath is also different as it sprays in a wider area but with very little distance, which I don't really find very intuitive. My initial thought is to strafe it like with the other dragons, but the width doesn't allow me to do that, so I must simply run away, which, as you know, is my favorite method to dodge attacks. It's so fun! And then lastly, he has to top it off with an army of goons chasing after you as you try to fight, either with skeletons or a bunch of soldiers. Nothing about this is fun, and the fact they reused the template for the already overused dragons is crazy. The music is also going to drive me insane with how much I've heard it. Ghost Flame Dragon earns our first F. Anyway, where was I? After that, there are some of these giant structures that do give a consistent reward. It is only a spirit summon upgrade material, but hey, it's a consistent reward, so, you know, that's an improvement. The geography has this area separated between these red and blue flower fields. The red flower fields are also known as Charo's Hidden Grave. Who the hell is Charo? I like that this upper level doesn't have a direct pathway from the blue area to the red. You actually need to start at the gravesite plain and travel towards the mountain and go south to get here. Another example of the interconnectivity of the map being more interesting to traverse than if it was just accessible from every angle. Because in the main game, once I fully scouted out an area, I would basically be done with it and never come back. But here, I actually end up returning to the central areas to find secrets like this, which is awesome. This really makes the world feel like one massive place. Upon entering this area, you... Oh, come on! Stop using shitty base game bosses! And like I said, there isn't much to find here. A few items thrown into a lake and a Wickerman off in the distance is really all you get. The Wickerman is at least unique. His legs actually have shielding, so you can't knock him over. Instead, you have to get to an elevated position and throw the new hefty pots into his hole to do more damage. A cool little puzzle, although the gimmick is only really fun once. Let's head back down to the blue, where there is some good visual variety, with a side path leading to a beach area that leads to a mini-boss and some items. There is another Finger Ruins here as well, and it suffers the same fate as the other one. And then you have the obvious major stopping point at the very south, with a giant cavern that leads to one of the legacy dungeons. I don't have much more to say about this area, as a lot of it I've already said. It's about as empty as the northern section of Shadow Altus, and has just as many underwhelming rewards and bad field bosses. First off, going once again back to the interconnected world, I know you're already sick of it. I love that this area is accessed through one of the normal dungeons. It gives more importance to the dungeons themselves, as it encourages you to go complete them, as now instead of just a boss with a spirit summon reward, they may actually contain entirely new locations. The initial area immediately is pretty ominous with the foggy gray atmosphere. Holy shit, that's a big ass dragon. Traveling to the base of the beast leads to an NPC character and an altar to trade for spells. I have to compliment anytime a set piece is used correctly for gameplay because of how inconsistent it is. Scaling the mountain will lead to battles with many wonderful dragons. I love the dragon boss fights. In fact, if you remember, every single one in the base game got an S. The few changes they have made to the dragons are frankly revolutionary. My favorite is how they never leave the sky ever, and constantly breathe fire, so you can never attack. I also love the ancient dragon, where the only difference is he has way too much health, and his lightning wave shoots in every direction after every attack. There are 4 dragons on the way up here, and nothing else. The journey up the mountain does make up for it somewhat though, as the atmosphere slowly getting more intense as you climb up, with the growing amounts of fog and lightning storms. I at least don't mind there not being too much to find up here, since it's a pretty linear path from start to end. If the bosses were actually good, then it'd be a great little section of the map. And thankfully, reaching the top does lead to a major boss. The strengths of this area are mainly that it meets expectations. I reach the top of the mountain, I get something cool. Same with the altar and the dead dragon. The minor rewards that are off the beaten path are more forgivable because, again, the linear design. The only miss is the mini-bosses. Somehow they keep making the base game dragons go from mid to shid. The journey to the Abyss begins when you find a secret wall in Shadow Keep. I like how much I've glazed Shadow Keep already, and we haven't even actually gotten to that part of the video. Oh, it's a coffin. Is it gonna warp me somewhere, or is it gonna make me transgender? Let's see. Damn it, it just took me somewhere. You're initially taken to a lower section of Shadow Altus, and from this point, the area is pretty linear with a few side paths. If you use a hefty furnace pot on this dead Wickerman, he'll actually wake up and you'll gain access to the small castle behind him. Really cool secret, but why is there another Wickerman right after? From there you'll journey further down the canyon, fighting bugmen, and then finally you'll see a dungeon. It looks like a pretty normal dungeon, and plus you've already gone pretty deep down, so I'm pretty sure this is the final stop, right? Wow, this dungeon goes pretty far down. Another one? Another one? Okay, finally made it to the boss. This must be the end. Where am I? Okay, calm down. Me and my buddy Torrent can get through this. God, the build-up and the journey to get here is insanely immersive and terrifying. This is what was missing from the base game. Instead of teleporting me into a deep underground area instantly, give me existential dread as I continue to go further and further underground, never knowing when I will reach the bottom. You get such a good sense of scale of this area because of how long that one path is. And then Torrent is too afraid to be here? Sorry guys, it's Jover. It doesn't take long before you realize these dark woods are taken over by frenzied flame. Everything is infected to a level that is never seen in the base game. The streaks of orange in the water, flowers, and walls, combined with the otherwise gray and lifeless environment, creates an extremely terrifying vibe. If even the sheep can't resist insanity, then what am I gonna do? After fighting some of the natives, you run into some even more concerning messages on the ground.
It waits inside. Don't let it see you. Once you are seen, there is no escape. It cannot even be touched. Combat is not an option.
It's a little bit on the nose, but I'm already shitting my pants, so this is only causing more to come out. Excuse me, old man, do you know what these ominous signs might be referring to?
Let's see what's down here. It's a little foggy, but I think I'll be fine. So far, the only thing that's bothered me is the rats and those natives. It haven't been that big a deal. I've bled them out good. You really can't see shit in here, can you? I think that's what the fuck is happening? Why am I seeing things? Ah! What the fuck is that? Run! What the fuck was that? There's so many eyes. What the fuck is happening? Run away! Hey, you can still see me! No! Get away from me! I don't consent to this! I'm sorry! I didn't mean to intrude. I think I can still see me. Am I safe? Am I safe? Not again! Where do you keep coming from? Okay. Get away from me! No! I'm Am I safe? Am I safe? I'm gonna go. Okay. Alright. Good. Okay. I think I'm safe. For now.
These are the aging untouchables, and they are completely invincible, requiring you to use stealth to get past them. Stealth hasn't been exclusively utilized much in this game overall, so this is a great excuse to facilitate it. Sneaking through the grass... Why does the corn make noise? Sneaking through the grass, you can finally reach the end of this nightmare with a legacy dungeon, and I'll speak about that place soon. But this whole experience was fantastic, and something new and unexpected for a Souls game, and I'm so glad that the Frenzied Flame was expanded on, as it wasn't present much in the base game. Now, while I thoroughly enjoyed my initial playthrough of this area, it has some glaring issues upon replay. The area is linear up until the Abyssal Woods, but once you get there, if you choose to stray off the beaten path, there is an astonishing amount of nothing in these woods. There's a church on the eastern corner, a waterfall with some items, and Midra's Manse, the legacy dungeon, is in the south. And that's really it. The only 3 enemies are rats, priests, and then the aging untouchables. They aren't even actually untouchable. You can parry them. And there just aren't very many of them. After the first time, it's pretty easy to sneak around them with how open the area is. I love this area so much, but I wish they would have made it completely linear to further focus on the horror experience, because otherwise it loses its muster after the first run through. I hate to shit on it because there's so many cool details. Like this one section actually gets some rain, reminding you that you are still exposed to the sky. You're just so deep down in the canyon you can barely see it. Honestly, I don't know if this is intentional. It seems like it might be a bug, but please don't remove it, Miyazaki. I really like it. So with an amazing journey to the lowest point in the map and the terrifying atmosphere, the Abyssal Woods unfortunately ends up not delivering as much mechanically. At least we got some actual good frenzy weapons from it. We're almost there. We just need to navigate the only place in the Shadow Realm that doesn't look like it's dying. Oh shit, never mind. This area does stand out though with its more vibrant color scheme and unique architecture. It's also unique mechanically, as instead of being in one big open area, exploring has you switching between maze-like underground paths and the plateaus above. It's more linear in a sense, but the tunnels have a lot of different paths and connect to the surface in many different ways, so exploring is still open while feeling a lot different than previous zones. I like the difference in environment, and despite the maze-like design of the tunnels, I never found it too difficult to find where I was going on later runs. You get just enough consistent landmarks and enemy placements to keep track, plus the size of the tunnel gives you much more room to take in your surroundings than something like the Lanedale sewers. The area is actually deceptively small, as the amount of underground paths and verticality adds a lot to find, despite the small section of the map that this place takes up. This area definitely has more efficient use of space, and I wish the rest of the areas were similar to this. Rao also contains some of the most hidden secrets. There's an invisible bridge that leads to a special weapon. The rock to unlock this spirit spring is located way above it. This is one of the ones I've mentioned before that's a lot harder to find. Again, I wish there were more of these. This one area where you drop down onto these pillars is the only secret that I never found on my first run through. It really doesn't look like a place you're supposed to be. They do put an item on the ledge to let you know you can stand there, but it is still kind of hard to see. And you know, I could live without the rot section, but you know, I understand sometimes the Taco Bell hits you hard and you can't hold back.
I want to go home, then edge!
We did get a new Crucible Knight variant with a big hammer. I'm pretty good at fighting Crucible Knights, so you know, it's nice to see a familiar foe that I don't have to struggle with. This might just be my favorite area in the game. There are no big empty areas, there's plenty of secrets and important items, and the underground passages add a new layer to the exploration. Maybe the enemy selection could be a little better, but other than that I don't have any major complaints. Nice to have a final area not end up like the mountaintop of the Giants did. It feels like they've taken quality over quantity in most areas of the game, except for the size of the map. There's not a bunch of weapons that do the exact same thing, there's not so many bosses that they have to reuse normal enemies, and there's not as many random consumables that you may never use. And yet the size of the map is still gigantic. Items, rewards, and bosses are scattered so inconsistently and randomly that it's so easy to miss stuff, along with not having noticeable landmarks to guide you towards them. Rao is the only notable exception, really. I can't dare give it too bad of a score though, because I've never seen another open world achieve this level of intricacies and secrets due to its verticality and interconnected layout. And outside of the one portal, every single area is connected naturally. Secret paths and the great scenery make up for some of the problems, and hey, the primary gameplay of the combat and dungeons is not diminished by this world. And it still beats out basically every open world AAA game's world. I'll give it a B-. The difficulty and complexity of the enemies in this DLC is ramped up massively from the base game. In a lot of cases, normal enemies can have intricate and extended combo chains that require you to pay close attention in order to dodge. This is somewhat of a double-edged sword. On one hand, every fight is a lot more engaging and requires you to use your full arsenal to win, which I like. But on the other hand, it can be tiring to give this much attention to random fodder enemies when you're just trying to explore. The issue really lies with how many enemies are like this and what groups they are with. Fighting them one-on-one is perfectly fine, but depending on the area, it can be easy to get swept into a gank with multiple of these tougher enemies. This issue is also not an omnipresent occurrence, as I noticed it mostly in the legacy dungeons. These new enemy types by themselves are well designed, I just think their placement is sometimes questionable, especially when you need to run through these enemies several times when you're exploring. Because when you do fight them, they practically act like a mini-boss, but with less health. The horny warriors are ruthlessly aggressive, with so many different moves that can chain into each other. You actually get a little taste of the back and forth dance you normally only do with boss fights. Although another annoyance is because of how long and drawn out these combo chains are, it's easy to die from one mistake, because sometimes the stagger from one attack will stun lock you into the next. I think it should be difficult to dodge a swing after you get hit, not impossible. And with how high their damage output can be, you can say goodbye to your bussy if you get locked into a one-on-one duel with his spins. The Black Knights with Hammer are a more reasonable balance of strong but manageable, with groups of weaker enemies. They resemble the typical knight-type enemies that you always see in these Souls games, but with slower attacks that cause massive AoEs in front of them. Oddly enough, these enemies do have mini-boss variants, despite the horny warriors being stronger and not having any. The Twin Blade versions do basically qualify as a mini-boss though, and they suffer the same issues of stun locking you into a 55-hit combo, except they're infinitely faster. The basic soldiers also serve as a slightly harder variant of what you'd see in the main game, with an AoE stomp and slightly more involved combo moves. And of course, they added annoying-ass birds! And you know what? I would have been disappointed if they didn't. Whoa, it's pretty dark and spooky in here. Ah! Why are there scorpion spiders?
I'm going to give you a super F!
And then the curse blades won't stop moving. Like, oh my god. Calm down. Hey, whoa, sorry, I didn't mean it. Alright, that's it. You asked for it. The Fire Knights can also be annoying if they decide to spam the fire version of those really annoying magic swords that float above people's head. Like, if you are at a distance, they spam that shit. They don't stop. Like, brother, just let me get some distance so I can recover. It also makes fighting them in any kind of gank really annoying. It's unfortunate because I do think that their actual moveset is perfectly fine. It's really difficult, but I feel like the chains are a little more forgiving than the horny warriors. There are also a lot of reused enemy types, which is to be expected, but the selection in enemies is what's lacking. Like, why are the ejaculating bugmen back? Not a single person likes these losers. And you've got, like, the anal beads that shoot lasers at you. I forgot these guys even existed. Why do they exist? Oh, but at least they brought back the midgets. I love backshotting midgets. But in general, most of the reused enemies range from annoying to boring. The new enemies are definitely more challenging, to the benefit of some, but to the detriment of others. I can't really say the enemy quality went down from the base game, but it didn't get much better, because with every good enemy they added another equally annoying enemy. But none of them are absolutely awful or anything, so I think it all evens out to be a C+. The dungeons were probably the second most obvious case of quantity over quality before, so I'm happy to say that there are way less dungeons here, and more different types of dungeons. Love to see From Software listening to feedback. The new Forge and Jail, The new Forge and Jail dungeons offer both visual and mechanical differences, along with additions to the original style of the dungeons. The basic dungeons use mostly the same structure and pieces, but are better designed and do still introduce new mechanics. For one, the mechanic of always having to flip a lever to unlock the boss door has been removed. There was nothing wrong with that mechanic on its own, but it was annoying that literally every single base game dungeon had it, since it led to a lot of backtracking. These dungeons also just have more content, they're bigger. The length and size has expanded, but without using confusing layouts or puzzles. It's mostly linear. And to account for the increase in length, Stakes of Marika are used as checkpoints throughout, so you never lose a ton of progress if you die. These checkpoints are also clearly indicated, as they're always next to an elevator that takes you further down. The dungeons also give more incentive to complete them outside of just the boss reward, because the dungeons are much more integrated into the open world. The start and end of dungeons can connect to completely different sides of the map. The Jagged Peak, for example, requires you to complete a cave that starts at Gravesite Plains. It just gives a lot more personality and diversity in exploration. When it comes to enemies in the dungeons, the variety is still pretty lacking, but they did add enemy types. The gargoyles are still here, but some of them swallowed cannons. Damn, their deep throat game must be crazy. Holy shit! I do enjoy the mages. Their projectiles bounce off of the walls, so you really have to watch your step. It is a little goofy how far their range is for summoning shit under you though. And outside of those, most of the enemies are reused from the field, but that is better than the base game, which had 90% midget gargoyles. God, I love forges! The forges are filled with lava and contain lots of upgrade materials. The remnant of these weapon forging facilities is a really interesting idea. I also appreciate the entrances to most of these newer dungeons being an actual structure, rather than a random hole in the wall. The materials you get are quite random, but the sheer amount of them kind of makes up for it. The enemies here are mostly lava slugs and rock giants, which are not that interesting as they're pretty slow and easy, but they aren't annoying to fight like the gargoyles. They're actually quite wholesome. Aww. These dungeons typically don't end in a boss, which I think is a plus as it allows for more quality in the bosses across the whole game. The area instead ends in you getting a rare item and a warp appears so that you know you're done. Usually a special weapon taken straight out of the oven. Now that's nice and steamy. So overall, the forges are pretty simple, but they're also unique. The jails are giant cave systems with dungeons built into them. The entrances immediately make you wary of what's inside. The cages and chains everywhere make it very clear this was some sort of torture dungeon. They were into some freaky shit. There's a lot of jar people here too as well. I mean, they're hanging from the ceiling. Like, what's up with that? May the light of God expunge thee! You get much better variety in these dungeons alone, between the giant caverns, the smaller caverns, and the prison portions. And we get Miyazaki's favorite, platforming sections. You can jump now though, so I actually do like it. Only ones that really didn't improve are the caves. But there are only two, and they were just mid to begin with, so I'm not gonna complain about it. I got to abuse some blood cultists, so I still had fun. Stop! While the enemy quality and variety still holds the dungeons back a little, everything else has been improved upon immensely from the base game, so they are more than worth revisiting. B+. Being the first major dungeon, it takes very clear inspiration from the first dungeon of the original game, Stormveil. And to fit with Gravesite Plains, it gives a more sinister energy than Stormveil, with darker colors and higher difficulty. The dungeon also matches the open world design in providing a lot more verticality and interconnectivity between segments. Sort of like Rao, Ballarat manages to be very compact despite having a lot of content in it. Some locked doors that require keys from later in the level give you a reason to backtrack and explore areas more than once. But there are only 2 main locked doors, so this isn't too tedious. The only inefficient use of space is the secret swamp area, which is gigantic with nothing in it. Except the tree spirits. Another base game mini-boss that is really well designed! You do get a good sense of progression with how the dungeon goes up in a steep slope, so you can see the different parts of the dungeon above and below you. The amount of alternate and secret paths isn't as great as Stormveil, but you do still get some similar set pieces with rooftops to jump across, and the amount of alternate paths are still pretty plentiful. And this is probably the place where most players will realize how much the difficulty is scaled up. Specifically by introducing the Horny Warriors. 2 of them even. Throwing them in the first dungeon is a little crazy, but I mean, you know, go off Miyazaki. Other than them, you're mostly fighting big shadow men and bugs. Fucking scorpion spiders. I guess the main thing keeping it below Stormveil in quality for me is the lack of ways to get to the end. While the alternate paths may lead to items or shortcuts to earlier areas, there really is only a couple ways to reach the top. Unlike Stormveil, where you could basically go any direction and still have a way to get to the end that doesn't require backtracking to the last branching path. Still, the level does utilize all the right design principles of any good From Software dungeon, with branching paths, unique environments, and secrets. It just doesn't do anything super unique compared to the dungeons prior. If Ballarat was taking inspiration from Stormveil, then this level takes it from Rei Lucario, although this time it's a little more blatant. The color scheme, the enemies, the building designs, everything is ripped straight from that type of Hogwarts sorcery vibe, whatever you want to call it. And like Rei Lucario, the level design is more or less a straight shot to the boss, with side paths that only lead to extra items or enemies. Some of these side paths can be more interesting at least, with you hopping around the sides of the cliff into a waterfall that leads into the back entrance, and stuff like that. And the enemies do put up more of a fight, even with the basic soldiers as I talked about before. But there isn't much for me to say, as it is very simple, but it's inoffensive. It's like the tortilla chips you get at a Mexican restaurant before the meal. I'm a pretty big fan of massive, sprawling cave systems, and I've gotten a lot of that in this game. Love how you can see more of those giant coffins from the Cerulean coast above that have sunken down here. The actual layout of the area, though, is pretty basic, probably the most linear of all the dungeons. I wouldn't mind it, but outside of the cool set piece, there really isn't much going on as you travel down. The enemies are either these blood fiends, which are pretty mid, or just reused base game enemies. At the very least, none of these enemies are super annoying or anything, but there's really nothing new down here. You got those weird rock snakes that snipe you, some skeletons, and badly conceived! It's so good to see you! How have you been? But yeah, when it comes to the environment, other than the giant coffins, it's a pretty generic cave. All of the cool looking stuff is in the background. It honestly just feels like a really big version of one of the normal caves, and not really a legacy dungeon. And the only thing that really makes me even consider it a legacy dungeon is that there's a Remembrance boss at the end. That and the giant fall to get to him. I have to do this every time, don't I? It is worth getting to the end, though, to meet Saint Trina, cause she be just like me for real.
He drank St. Trina's bathwater.
She unironically is probably one of my favorite characters in the story, as she is quite literally the woman that Mikola wanted to become, but he threw her away in order to pursue godhood. It is a super creative way to represent trans people, and her design looks rad, so thumbs up from me. In short, there isn't much going on in this dungeon either, but it's still inoffensive. Just a big generic cave with a couple of highlights that make it slightly above average. As it is one of the major landmarks of the map, I expect great things. Look, the hippo at the beginning doesn't count. I'll mention him later with the other bosses. Don't get ahead of yourself, buddy. But spoiler alert, this is the best dungeon in the game. It is massive. There are so many different zones. The front courtyard, central library, clinic, and underground church. Every segment feels like its own dungeon, and yet everything connects into one giant connected building. The different areas really lend to this being a real working facility, with different functions to each room. The front entrance is guarded by Black Knights and foot soldiers, while in the central tower, Messmer's closest knights guard his important archives of books and knowledge. Everything connects together in a way that makes intuitive sense, both lore-wise and gameplay-wise. The first time you visit, you will mostly climb the tower through the central library. The main tower is extremely tall, with many different rooms and floors to explore. Not every path forward is obvious either, as there are many sections that seem inaccessible at a glance, encouraging you to explore more thoroughly and find creative solutions. Miyazaki knew what he was doing here. In scaling the tower, you also get to swap between inside and outside the building, giving even more variety to the environments you'll see. This path will lead you to the very top of the tower to fight Messmer. The area has so many secrets, it's basically impossible to find them all in your first go. The outside ledges can hide secrets below, or many twists and turns throughout the tower can hide many things. Plus, you actually get good rewards for secret areas here, unlike the open world. Some of the best spells and weapons are hidden here, like the Thrusting Shield or the Impenetrable Thorns spell. And with all this, I haven't even talked about the other major parts of Shadow Keep. Again, I love the alternate entrances and exits that make this area feel like a part of the world, and not like a separate entity. Before you go up the tower, you will probably find an alternate exit. This path leads through the clinic that is trying to heal the shamans, which are the people trapped in jars, from their sickness. Lots of cool world building to piece together in here. Once you reach the other side of the bridge, you will reach Rao. This exit, being so easily accessible, plants the seed in your head that there may be other routes from the outside, and the map also hints at that. Going in the back entrance leads you to a flooded church filled with... I'm gonna ignore that. The area is a very clear callback to New Londo from Dark Souls 1, and there is a similar progress of scaling the rooftops to find the switch that lowers the water level. But here it's a lot more interesting with proper jumping as an option. From here you can either go up to find an alternate path up the tower, above the rafters, and then down to the back exit, or go underground to the Shadow Tree base, both of which lead to a major boss. I also want to mention that the entire dungeon has fantastic checkpoint placement. Graces are far apart enough to make you feel like you've made good progress when you find one, and Stakes of America are placed frequently in between, so you never lose massive amounts of progress. This dungeon has it all. Great diversity in rooms and chambers with tons of branching paths, enemies that properly accompany the area they are in, and 3 different major bosses at the end of completely different paths. This is definitely the best dungeon in all of Elden Ring, and maybe one of FromSoft's best dungeons overall. This dungeon marks the end of the journey through the Abyssal Woods. A man tells you to leave this place, but after all the effort it took to get here, ain't no way you stopping now. So many ruined and burnt books cover the floors of this entire building. All of the shelves are toppled over, and the wood is all burnt up. So much environmental storytelling is hidden all throughout the manse, and it paints itself so clearly. Quite literally, with the paintings that show the forest used to be bright and luscious, despite how deep it was underground. Such a cool detail that these very paintings are what hide the deeper parts of the dungeon. And all of this is coming from someone who doesn't usually bother delving into the lore much on my first playthrough, but this place intrigued me. I found myself asking so many questions. Why is the mansion all the way down here? What caused the forest to be engulfed in the frenzied flame? And what sort of study or research was happening here that required so many books? I haven't even talked about the actual layout. The layout is pretty linear with minor side paths per usual, similar to Castellensis. But exploring the environment is what really sells the place. From the secrets behind the paintings to levers that activate hidden doors and platforms. It's very apparent that someone has gone through great lengths to make sure you don't make progress here. And this is also a good example of using space efficiently. It almost feels like a Dark Souls level with many shortcuts that lead back to checkpoints. You can see the previous area below you on the rafters. It feels like you get to go through every room in the mansion before you reach the end. Enemy-wise, it's mostly the same as the woods, but some added heavy hitters make up for that. A very horny man is placed at the beginning, so you really know Midra doesn't want you to be here. Plus some fat versions of the priests. How did so many giant rats get in the rafters? So really the only complaint I have is the enemies, because the design and visuals are great. You really get to uncover a story in this dungeon, and it's one of the most memorable experiences I've had in this game. The final dungeon of the game, and of course it gives some jaw-dropping scenery to look at. Wow! Oh no. Looks like the toughest enemy in the game's just got its ultimate unlocked. And there are 4 of them! Yay! These guys are really cool, but god, you get no room to fight them. Like, their damn ultimate move covers more than the entire fucking floor. Also, these priests that summon 15 holy tornadoes under you are terrible. Why can they do this? When I use the spell, it doesn't work that way! While you do get a similar amount of linearity to the other dungeons, the alternate and secret paths are a lot more involved. A lot of platforming is utilized in hiding secrets, so you get more creative uses of the verticality. I do love the amount of height you get scaling the spiral tower, and I also like how this place is an extension of Belurat, as it is built on top of it. You never actually have to enter Belurat to get here, which is a little odd, but still, the connection and visual is cool. Speaking of visuals, the environment is super unique, being a mishmash of all kinds of different architectures mixed into a massive floating spiral that soars into the sky. The area screams divinity, which makes sense as Mikola wants to become a god instead of being a woman or whatever. But then you get near the top though, and you have to fight an awful NPC gang fight. I'm going to talk about the NPC bosses in general in a minute, but just know that this is by far the worst out of all of them. Depending on how you handle the side quests throughout the game, you may also have to fight even more of them.
More, I love you, but if you throw another goddamn rat pot at me...
It definitely feels like all of the energy for the dungeons went into Shadowkeep. Belurat is solid, but the Fissure and Ensis are pretty average with basic design. None of the dungeons are bad by any means, but most aren't truly outstanding outside of Shadowkeep. Midra's Manse is also notable, but because of the journey and build-up that it is a part of, along with the story it tells, combined with okay level design. But that doesn't diminish how good Shadowkeep is, and all of the other dungeons range from great to inoffensive. Shadowkeep is so big it basically counts as like 3 dungeons anyway, so all in all I thoroughly enjoyed the legacy dungeons here. A-. Side quests were pretty much impossible to follow without a guide in the main game, with NPCs hanging out in the middle of nowhere and objectives not being clearly communicated. Now for the most part I think that the characters are placed in more obvious spots now, but there are still some outliers like Ansbach camouflaging himself in the corner of this room. But the quests have somehow gotten worse at communicating what you're supposed to do next. When Aigon screams at you to go kill Bale, he doesn't mention you also need to kill the dragon duo on the way, which I can assure you, most people will skip. In fact, most of the time they just don't tell you what to do next at all. Moore never mentions that you need to find random bugmen and heal them with the healing stones that like 2 people ever use. And so many different quests are interconnected with each other in a way that if you progress one quest, it can completely change or prematurely end another quest. And of course, all of these characters have extremely unique items that can't be gotten anywhere else, so you basically have to do research on the wiki in order not to miss anything. There are only 2 I would consider okay. Count Ymir's is very straightforward, with him telling you to go to each finger ruins and put your mouth in places it shouldn't be. He then gives you a 3rd map to a finger ruins you've never seen, but if you pay attention you will notice it looks like the church that you meet him in, and you can find a secret path underneath that leads to a boss. Ansbach is also very basic, as you really only have to find a scroll in Shadowkeep and give it to him. After that, he appears to help you fight the final 2 bosses. If he wasn't in that corner, like I mentioned, then he would be perfectly fine, and I'm so pissed that I missed him on my first playthrough, because he gives some of the most easy to understand lore exposition Miyazaki has ever provided. Well, he also makes the final boss ass, because he gives Radahn an ungodly amount of health while not helping at all, but I mean, at least he tried, I guess.
Ansbach, you're a real homie, come here.
And don't get me started on the fact that what quests you do affects how bullshit the fight against Letta is. So if you get unlucky like me, you have to fight all 5 characters. I'm not a fan of how these NPC quests were done, and for the most part I would recommend ignoring them entirely. There's not much else to say because it's just the same bad quest design from the base game, but somehow parts of it are worse. So for that, it gets a D. We're in the home stretch, so now it's time to talk about the bosses. Just want to give some clarification on how I'm doing this part of the video, as it's a little different. I'm considering mini-bosses any boss that doesn't drop a remembrance or something of equal value, i.e. Bale's Heart. I'm also only going to cover bosses that are new to the DLC. I've already talked about the open world using too many base game bosses, so talking about them here would be redundant. I've also ranked almost every boss from the original game in my previous video, so you should go watch that! You should go watch it now! It's only 4 hours, it's fine! If a boss has multiple variants, I will talk about them together and rank them as one entity. And lastly, unlike with the open world or dungeons, I'm gonna rank all of the bosses separately, as I think the quality fluctuates more with these, so grouping them all into one rating like I have before doesn't really feel fair. Alright, first boss. This was actually the first boss I encountered in the DLC at all, and he kicked my ass good. He is very small, but don't let that fool you. He's also very fast and nimble. This is a boss I'm glad can be staggered easily because oh my god, this man never stops. His constant jumping and dashing makes it very challenging to tell exactly what he's doing, and his combos can last for ages if you don't get an opportunity to interrupt him. I'll admit I was a bit nerfed in this footage as I chose not to use any Shadowtree fragments towards the beginning of my first playthrough. But it did force me to learn this fight properly, and I think it helped me appreciate it. Another method he can use to throw you off is he can briefly turn invisible during his dashes. So you have to react much quicker as you can only see him when his swing is about to land. The cherry on the cake though that makes all of this fair is he tends to move around so much that you can use that as your tell to distinguish attacks. He may go invisible, but your camera doesn't break off of him, so you can guess his move by how he decides to swing around you. The attacks also balance themselves out with dangerous attacks being more obvious. If he's about to hit you with a 6-swing wombo combo, he will give you more time to react on the first swing. Was not expecting this much power from a demi-human, but I'm happy to see— Waterfowl! This little rat gremlin has earned my respect and is a top-tier mini-boss for sure. I can only really criticize how early he appears in the DLC, and how deceptive his moves can seem at first glance. B+. The Death Knights are the perfect mini-boss. Easier and less complex than a main boss, but still challenging with unique attacks and is completely fair. The Knights come in two flavors, Great Axe and Dual Axes. Both of these variants are perfect examples on how to reuse assets correctly. They both have similar gimmicks and models, but their basic moveset is different enough to not feel copy-pasted. The Great Axe version has a wide assortment of slow and fast swings. His combos can be slightly customized, but you are less likely to get caught off guard, as when he extends the combo, it is usually with a slow, charged swing. So even if you took the attack window, you still have time to dodge again. The dual-wielding version, as you'd expect, has a faster moveset with longer combos, but it's at the cost of his range. The faster attacks are also made up for by easier to distinguish combos, as there are more unique swing patterns with two weapons at once. Both versions utilize lightning magic to fight. While they still give you a second to breathe between attacks, they keep the aggression up with either ranged lightning spells or a dash to close the gap. Their dashes can also potentially follow up with a special attack, so you have to be more careful at range. Their ultimate attacks have them spin into a shockwave that covers the ground in lightning. This is a great attack because it requires a different response depending on your positioning. At range, jumping over the blast is the best call, but close up, dodging and positioning behind him will avoid most of the blast as it travels in an arc in front of him. The knight initiates his second phase with a dash into a grab attack.
He's sucking me! His health bar is back to full, but I've been drained!
It's fairly easy to dodge the second time around, so it makes sense for it to punish you harshly. Sorry, I'm just so hard right now. Only problem with this fight is he is way too susceptible to backstabs. It can be pretty easy to get to his back at the end of his combo, since like I mentioned, his final attacks in a combo tends to be slower. Still a fantastic mini-boss and a great payoff to the end of a dungeon. A-.
Death Knight number 1, can you please step forward? Death Knight number 2, you may now step forward. Where the hell is Godwin?
Definitely the worst bosses in the DLC. And yes, this is after I had to fight the Death Bird again. Like in the last video, I do not respect them enough to separately rank them. I can understand putting a few of these in, as basically every FromSoft game has them to some extent, but too many actual boss battles at the end of dungeons are just these fuckers with the exact same brain-dead AI that spams attacks constantly with no limits to stamina or magic like the player has. I would honestly argue these are even worse than the base game due to their much higher health pools that are comparable to the actual bosses. And they can still heal! What makes these enemies so annoying is they are fundamentally unfair, due to them being a player with so many advantages over you. So if you try to fight them with just a standard melee dodge strategy, like you would with everything else, it just doesn't work. You have to utilize an unfun and repetitive strategy of spamming powerful attacks, because that's all they do. If they didn't have time to make new bosses, I would have rather them just reuse more base game bosses before NPCs. And so, due to them not learning from their mistakes in the original game, I'm sorry, but I'm giving every one of these a collective F. It's basically a stronger version of the giant bears in the base game, but with more moves. Therefore, it carries a lot of the issues that those bears had. I don't really hate the way they fight, but they are just so big that it feels like you can never position correctly, and you can also never get out of range of their attacks. The bears are ridiculously aggressive. Trying to gain any distance will cause them to charge at speeds a creature that big should not be able to. But when up close, it can be hard to see what it's doing as it takes up so much screen space. Their moves are decent in a vacuum. The ground shockwaves have a good tell and can be jumped, and while they tend to not leave many gaps between attacks, all of their attacks have pretty distinct windups. If they weren't as gigantic and leave slightly bigger gaps between combos, they would be fine, but for now they can be pretty annoying. C-. Boy, somebody needs to brush their teeth. Who gave the giant hippo the job of guarding the front gate? Was it Messmer? Honestly, it might have ended up being a good move on Messmer's part, as the thing is that they're so annoying to fight, no one would ever get past him. His head is too big. All or at least most of his attacks use his big-ass head, which means the hitbox to dodge is about as big as the goddamn Shadow Keep, bruh. He also makes sure you can't get any distance from him, but he also gets so close to you that you end up underneath his chin. So his giant, disgusting teeth fill 90% of my screen. I don't know how you're supposed to position with this guy, because I feel vulnerable no matter where I am. He also swivels on a dime, so you can't even keep to his side to avoid attacks. Oh, and let's not forget his command grab where he charges about 1 mile per year. So no matter how you dodge, the hitbox will linger on you and catch you anyway. And then for his second phase, he reveals his mother was actually a porcupine and shoots spikes everywhere at such a high frequency that dodging is basically luck. Or he'll jump into the fucking stratosphere, and then somehow you're supposed to iframe through his entire body. What sucks too is there are actually a few smaller variants of the hippo in the open world, but those are not that bad because they're like not the size of a house. And they don't have the second phase, so you get no bullshit spike attacks. But those are not considered bosses, so I'm not ranking them. Sorry, but this is the worst boss in the DLC. F. They may be normal enemies turned into bosses, but don't freak out. There's only 2. And as I mentioned before, the Twin Blade version feels more like a boss that they turned into an enemy. Now the Hammer version is pretty simple. His attacks are slow and predictable, but he does have a complete moveset, and the boss variant also adds a tongue whip. Freaky. Now the Twin Blade version is where you gotta watch out. He doesn't have many different combo strings, probably only about 3, but each one is very long and fast. It is a bit overwhelming with how little you get to attack, but he also doesn't have much health, so it balances out. He also has a big charge attack to break up the pace a little. Still very basic though, but not bad. I wouldn't consider this filler, as the enemy versions are pretty sparse to begin with, and again, the moveset justifies it. C. Well, while this is technically a player NPC fight, he does both have unique mechanics, and his moves aren't really anything the player usually uses, so I think it does count as an actual boss. His attacks are pretty slow and don't do much damage, and the fight is mostly focused on his main gimmick where he makes duplicates of himself. This does make the fight more interesting as it turns an easy enemy into something you have to pay attention to. His slow and predictable moves make it fairly reasonable to handle with a 5-on-1. The floating projectiles can be a little annoying if they all-out spam it, but for the most part it's manageable. Now this doesn't make it good, it just makes it fair. There's only really so much that can happen with how limited his moveset is, so he gets old fast. However, he does have another ability where he inflicts a curse on you as the fight goes on. This is represented by floating heads above your character, and once a certain amount appear, you instantly die. This is an interesting idea, but I think it's not very well communicated. The first time I died, I wasn't even really sure what killed me. I think if the heads did some sort of flashy animation before you died, it would be more obvious that those are what killed you, and that you want to avoid getting them on your head. I also didn't even really understand what caused them to attach to you. even when I noticed they were there. I believe the way it works is if any of his clones are still alive before a certain amount of time, you get as many heads on you as there were clones still there. As you can see in this clip, I chose to focus on the real boss and died to the rest of the clones being alive for too long. That in and of itself is also a perfectly fine mechanic, but the game doesn't make it clear that's what did it. The fight isn't bad, it's just not very interesting outside of the gimmicks, which aren't made very obvious. D+. Now this boss is sort of like the priest enemies you find in An-Aralim, except he aggressively spams all of his spells. From the start, he begins to assault you with so many holy beams, you start to wonder if God is real. See, when I use that spell, it does not shoot that many beams! Shockingly, he cannot spam Spyra as much as that one guy. Getting close and landing some hits will cause him to teleport to the opposite side of the room. Teleporting around is a little bit annoying, but every time he teleports, he will gain a teleport. Oh wait, he's teleporting again. My favorite reoccurring element of Elden Ring! And then if you didn't get blasted enough by God's light, he summons more priests to spam more spells! Towards the end, it gets a little ridiculous with how many dudes are in one spot, machine gun firing holy light at you. Not to mention the fact you can barely get around them to reach Jory because he just spawns queso on you.
No! I'm not throwing cheeks! I don't wanna!
I can't critique much more about him because he really does boil down to just spamming way too much magic and summoning way too many gooners. The only saving grace is he is really weak to backstabs, but that doesn't fix him teleporting constantly. Sorry, Jory, but I don't have to be very inquisitive to know why you suck. F. This is really the only boss in the DLC I would consider filler. He is just a normal Blood Fiend enemy, but bigger. What this does allow me to appreciate is the improvement on boss quality compared to the main game. While there are still some bad bosses like the Hippo, the percentage of good bosses to bad is much better. And while boss quality is decent, the real improvement is in the uniqueness of each boss. While the open world does insist on reusing base game bosses, most of the actual DLC encounters have next to no duplicates. The Death Knights, as I mentioned, only have 2, and they are alternate variants. The Black Knights also have 2 with unique variants. And the Golden Hippos have a few scattered throughout the world, and I mean, that's really it. The smaller amount of bosses overall, it definitely seems to be what's helped. A lot of encounters can be diminished if they are copy-pasted all over the place, plus having major bosses duplicated at all can somewhat take away from their experience. Godric being duped is a good example of one that shouldn't have been. The only egregious example of duping is with the NPC fights. I do still think these fights could be fun with better AI, but in the state they're in right now, it's inexcusable how many times they fall back on them. Even if the AI was tolerable, they still reuse them too much. That's really the only exception though, so yeah, while the boss ranking can still be all over the place, I do appreciate the lack of copy-pasting, and only a few bosses are notably bad. Of course, I'm getting a little ahead of myself as I still haven't mentioned the Remembrance Bosses. Oh yeah, I didn't rate the Blood Fiend. Filler.
The grand finale is approaching. Will the amount and quality of the main bosses continue the trend of the mini-bosses? I think it's likely. There's not much more for me to preface, so you know the drill. Let's go! The first boss already stands out.
Very creative design based on Chinese dragon dances. Miyazaki did touch it though, so it's fucked up and dark. The concept of two sweaty men in a dancing lion suit is used to great effect in this fight. The coordination between these two is honestly insane. They dance and spin around with the grace of... I don't know, but they do it with grace. With this comes very unique attack windups that are original and well telegraphed. They snake around in many different ways, but their primary attack is biting with the lion head. The snake-like movements in the windup serve mostly as a tell for what combo they're going to start. All of this is well and good, but his sheer size can make it difficult to position. Depending on how his tracking decides to follow you, he can end up right in your face, leading to poor visibility. They also tend to continuously approach you even when they're in neutral, no matter how close they are, so it does feel like you're fighting for space. A couple attacks that send him backwards instead of forwards could have mitigated this, but it isn't a deal breaker, just something you have to account for. The camera also can spaz out a little bit when he gets close. I wish the camera zoomed out a little more for this fight. As it is a dance, their combos have a very obvious rhythm to make each attack more clear, even if you can't see them, especially with the more involved moves. I would only consider his smoke breath to be a bad attack in the first phase at least. The issue of him being too close makes it impossible to see the smoke, and he tends to spin around for way too long while still approaching you, so it's always a pain when he does this. Second phase is when he introduces his elemental powers.
Who the hell this guy think he is? Avatar Aang, the last airbender, master of all four elements, who can bring balance to the world or some shit?
His moves remain the same, but lightning strikes around them as they attack, so you have to be more careful in your positioning. The part I don't like is how random and how many lightning blasts spawn. You never get an attack window without some luck. They do gain a lightning spear spell, which while quick is reasonable to dodge. The wind phase adds short bursts of tornadoes after each attack. This is more manageable as it mostly requires a better timed dodge or for you to keep more distance, and his tornado blast is easy enough to avoid with how slow it is. Ice is more tricky as the effect lingers longer, but the advantage is it is only on the floor, meaning you can take advantage of jumping. This would be fine if again he didn't get so close to you, blocking your jumps. For his final attack, he does a combination of all three elements in a row, and it is both very flashy and difficult to avoid, but it is perfectly fair. While there is some annoyance with the camera and his elemental attacks, he is mainly sold by his well-animated moves, and his general design and spectacle is very unique. Also, fun fact, this is the only Remembrance boss in the DLC with a duplicate somewhere. And that one has some unique properties, with death magic.
Since when did I go off the deep end and learn death bending?
Decent first fight to give us a taste of what's in store for us. B.
Thou'rt a brazen fool, Tarnish, to come here. To interrupt my ponderance of resplendent Messmer and Pillar of Armies, 'tis a sin I shall not forgive. I, Rellana of the Twin Moons, will not let you reach him. It seemeth to me that kicking your ass would be a suitable punishment.
George, you do know there are other letters in the alphabet, right? Rellana, in a sense, is the Margit of the DLC. A difficult boss that blocks off the later parts of the game. Unless you go around, but I mean, you could go around Margit too, so it's fine. And she is very difficult. Her and many bosses after feel tuned for experienced players.
Teeny weeny Tarnish, so eensy wincy before towering Messmer.
Alright buddy, you're gonna get it now. Her dual swords give her a lot of reach, and she is fast and nimble. She'll leap in front, away, and around you, so you can never gain distance for too long, which keeps up the tension. She carries the sort of fluidity and grace of the light greatswords, so everything has clear momentum and rhythm. And she utilizes her leap not just for mobility, but will also chain them into attacks. The direction of your dodge matters as much as the timing, even more so than other bosses. since she can reach either side of herself with her swords, so there's only really one direction of damage that can be fully avoided. Unless you want to parry her. Haha, take that!
Ha! Deflect mine blows as thou pleasest. Such attempts shall be naught before mighty Messmer.
She also has a huge amount of moves, from spinning attacks to double swings, and these moves are easily distinguishable between one another, once you get used to it. All of this melds together really well with her aggressiveness, which is just enough to need constant attention, but not so much that you get overwhelmed.
Your stolen strength, fair Tarnished, hath little to compare with fair Messmer. Not even, dare I say, in appearance either.
She's aggressive in a couple other ways too, I guess. The only thing you might get overwhelmed by is how long her combo chains can last. She can mix moves together like Margit, but each chain makes more sense visually based on where her arms are at. So for example, she'll never do a swing that starts from her left into another swing that starts from her left. Her animations always flow together, so it's more intuitive when she is done with a combo or not. Plus, there is a certain dynamic added with the way she mixes moves together. Some moves can have a follow-up, but there is a pause between them, so you get to decide how risky you want to be with your attacks. Obviously, attacking at every opportunity isn't going to do much good. And there's also a certain amount of riskiness to what you can and can't dodge. Missing the dodge completely and getting hit by both swords is going to do a lot of damage, but if you manage to do a poorly executed dodge and only get hit by one sword, it was still worth executing that dodge, because even though it was a bad dodge, you only get hit by half of the attack. And so that's another example of how risk versus reward is used in this fight. Some of her moves actually remind me a lot of Pontiff Sullivan, with her dual swords and...
To be felled so briskly by magnanimous Messmer's scorning flame is quite inevitable.
Alright, Pontiff wannabe looking asshole. Her second phase builds perfectly off the first, with most of her combo strings staying the same, but with new elements, such as her fire sword leaving an explosion after certain swings. She also gains a few new big moves, such as her magic beams that take some strategy to dodge with how close they are shot to each other. But there are multiple ways that you can avoid this, so it isn't unfair. She also has a fire tornado spin, although it is much easier to dodge since you just need to get out of the initial blast, but I swear you have to be no farther than 1 inch from her to do it, otherwise she just does the magic beams. Maybe she's trying to save that one to show off to Daddy Messmer.
I tire of your pitiable squirming.
Wait, whoa, what are you doing?
Behold, my grandest blue orbs. Twin moon convergence. A power even magnificent Messmer found most majestic, I assure thee.
Okay, now I know it's coming. I can dodge it pretty easily this time.
Thy jumpmanship is quite impressive, Tarnished. Should one compare thyself to anyone aside, Lord Messmer.
While it is very easy to dodge once you've seen it, every boss has gotta have a flashy move here and there. This is peak FromSoft boss design, and the difficulty follows perfectly from the end of the base game. I don't want to seem like I'm simping for her as much as she does for Messmer though. Her one issue keeping her from S tier is she can summon those stupid fucking swords above her head that can chain into other attacks. Why does every sorcery boss use this? Especially unfortunate if she combos it with the blue balls. But that doesn't stop her from being one of the best bosses in the DLC, and the first time you defeat her will feel like a huge achievement.
I see thee now. Not even my wondrous spheres could have defeated thee. Yet as assuredly as thou hast defeated me, thou shalt be not by kindling for almighty Messmer's unquenchable flame.
Hey!
Those stripped of the grace of gold shall all meet death. In the embrace of Messmer's flame.
God, maybe I see where Rellana is coming from. He's hot in more ways than one. Many of his attacks create a trail of bright flame that puts Demon Soul's paint fumes to shame. The effect is just flashy enough to be impressive, but isn't too much as to not obstruct his moveset. The difficulty of his moveset comes from his diverse and adaptable combo chains. The learning curve is pretty intense, but with time it is fully masterable. The sheer amount of unique moves add to the challenge, but also make him super engaging. Every move has its own spectacle, from spinning lunges to aggressive spear throws. He also has extremely quick movement and repositions constantly depending on the move, adding extra depth and strategy on what moves may or may not be counterable and in what ways. One of my favorite moves requires you to get creative as he thrusts his spear many times before slamming down. The final explosion requires timing even from a distance, and the fast stabs are so fast that you have to find a way to get away from them. But there are multiple ways to do so. But probably what makes this fight so special and satisfying to master is the way his custom combos work. It's a very different dynamic from Rellana, as unlike her, he doesn't have quite as much flexibility with his mix-up, but instead has a handful of options for very specific swings. Not only that, but the wind-up to each move has a subtle but noticeable cue to tell you what combo chain he is going to apply next. For example, during this 360 spin attack, when performed quickly, signifies the end of a combo chain. But if he holds the yacht longer on the wind-up, he will actually follow up with another attack. This also plays into another trait of Messmer, that I love, which is it's very clear when he has finished a combo. Despite his many mix-ups, he is only allowed to end combos on very specific moves, so you always know when to attack. Once you start to learn his patterns a little better, there are also plenty of smaller windows in the middle of combos. It's a really good balance of predictability and unpredictability. Literally the only attack I could complain about is that shitty little fireball, but I mean that's pretty minor. In his second phase, he gouges his eye out and then unleashes the snakes within. Now on top of his already complex moveset, he can summon giant snakes to snatch you. These moves are much more flashy and obvious with big windups and big snakes. The challenge comes mostly from the delayed windup, and the snakes have alternate bites that can combo into each other. The high damage and precise timing is mitigated by, again, the obvious tells, and these moves cannot be mixed together much. You will only have a few different combos with the snakes. The snakes also offer bigger punish windows. The snake's ultimate attack is also a great balance of spectacle and difficulty. Many giant snakes flail around, but only one attacks you at a time. It can be hard to tell which snake is coming at you, but it has a rhythm that matches the normal snake moves. It's manageable despite the chaos, and it looks super cool and intimidating, matching the energy of Messmer using his last resort to beat you. Everything melds together so perfectly that I can say with confidence that this is my favorite boss in all of Elden Ring. God, what a handsome man. S. Guarding the path to God's sleepiest soldier is the Putrescent Knight, a spooky, scary skeleton riding a very goopy horse. This boss is less complicated than most of the Remembrance bosses, and mostly stands out due to his frankly wacky movements. The Putrescent Knight's attacks are very cartoonish with the way he spins his whole body in a tornado, or jumps up and down to stomp you. His combo move with his horse is very fun as the skeleton and horse come at you separately. The move does go on for a little too long though. His cartoonish moves make him fairly easy to read, but what makes him difficult is he is so mobile that you can barely hit him. I don't mind a fight with high evasion in exchange for them having low health, but if the effervescent knight decides to, he can just keep running circles around you and never leave an opening. Reminds me of the knight's cavalry, which is not great. The bioluminescent knight in his second phase doesn't add much more than a few ghost flame attacks. At first he will climb up onto a pile of goo and hurl waves of fire in random directions. The fire is so thick that I wasn't even really sure if you could jump it, but you can. It is cool to see an attack that you have to jump. Now, I could complain that the game never really tells you that jumping also gives you iframes, so you may not even think to try jumping, but that's more a problem with the game as a whole, not the boss. Once you do know how to jump, the rest of the fire moves are pretty simple, but the added complexity of having to remember to jump does add points for me. While the Acalescence Knight's animations are really well animated, the lack of variety in his moves can make the fight repetitive, not to mention how long his combos can last. The waiting game of trying to find an opening is what really limits this fight, but it isn't terrible at all. C. I'm not beating around your bush. Let's start with the obvious problem. This charge attack. I'm not trying to fat shame the pig or anything, but the hitbox is too big. Rolling straight through it usually gets you hit, unless you're really precise. The fact he always starts the fight with this too is what makes it more frustrating than it needs to be. They did move him further back in the arena in an update though, so I will forgive them, plus it's not hard to use Bloodhound Step or something similar to bypass it. Anyway, let's talk about the rest of the fight. You may assume I'm going to complain about him constantly moving around like the Puberty Knight, and I would've if you asked me when I first attempted gay ass. But I soon realized I was being the gay ass. While he does run around a lot, the end of his combos will always leave him right in front of you as long as you stay aggressive. Learning where his combos actually end is the tricky part, but it all flows together once you pick up on the signs. Most of the time when he does run away, it is an attack windup that ends up getting him closer to you again. Commander Gayass's attacks are also quite unique, and they utilize the movement of his boar. While his primary weapon is his lance, the boar attacks just as often with headbutts and kicks. Their constant movement actually enhances the mix of attacks, and unlike the hippo, you aren't stuck underneath its chin when it decides to slam you with its head. As a whole, the boar tends to keep his side facing you when not attacking, so getting close doesn't cause any camera problems. The only combo that might still throw you off is his super long combo chain that mixes in a lot of quick and delayed attacks that take some precision. But it is 100% consistent when he starts it, so it's something that is satisfying to learn. He doesn't have that many moves, all things considered, but I think that the way it's seamlessly weaved into his general, running around movement hides that fact. And believe it or not, you can actually use Torrent. He isn't very useful, but he's there. It can make dealing with a couple moves easier, at least. More so in his second phase when he uses more gravity magic. The magic mainly adds in scarier charge attacks that do more damage. One spell will create a stationary orb that drags you into it. This mainly forces you to position well to stay out of its blast range while also dodging Gayass, which I think meshes well with his mobile fighting style. If you're fighting him correctly, you won't be staying in one spot, so avoiding this is more of a checkpoint to make sure you know what's up. His whole moveset just flows together so well. The only sour stain on this Gayass is the annoying charge. Without that, he'd probably get an A, but with it, come in her, Gayass, still gets an A-.
Curse you, Baal! Behold, a true Drake warrior, and I, Egon! Your fears made flesh.
Now this dude is the definition of morbidly a beast. The many battle scars, including his missing leg and wing, is raw as hell. You can even see the missing heads of flaccid sex phone. I'm frankly mad that he didn't kill that guy, cause that meant I had to go kill him, and that shit was ass. Like I was saying, this beast is big. His attacks carry tremendous weight, and the scale is portrayed magnificently, with him leaving his head way down in order to reach you. The heaviness makes the attacks pretty clear of when to dodge, and they create a lot of impact, so you feel like you're dodging nukes. He doesn't mix together combos much, other than a few exceptions, which I will be real, are kind of annoying. He sometimes follows this move up with a fast headbutt, yet he does it so rarely I keep forgetting it and then getting hit. What I find brings this fight down is the attack openings. He transitions between combos pretty fast, and his face only hangs down for so long, so attacking can sometimes feel impossible, especially when his attacks cause you to move farther from his head in order to dodge. I don't mind the fight forcing some positioning skills on you, but the window to attack is sometimes just way too small, to where I just don't even bother attacking after certain moves. This is unfortunate because if we take each move individually, and not in sequence, they are almost all good. Some of his bigger attacks are really fun, like when he charges way behind you and then backs up into a tail swipe. That looks cool, catches you off guard, and is reasonable to learn once you know it's coming. His orange lightning combined with his red fire is also a huge spectacle bonus, and it gives a clear sign of which attacks are more deadly. The actual fire breath is a pain though with how it spreads around randomly. The camera could also use some work. It's not the worst I've seen from this game, but it can be hard to manage. Getting too close sometimes covers your screen and his entire body, which is a problem when most of his attacks are these super wide swings I need to be able to see. Once again, just zooming out the camera would be a huge help. He initiates his second phase a lot sooner into the fight than most bosses before have. And you know what? I think it's better this way. The first phase is more of an introductory stage to the main challenge, so allowing the second phase more time to breathe both adds to the challenge and lets you spend extra time in the more interesting part of the battle. This trend does continue for a few other main bosses, and I appreciate that. I hope this becomes a common trend in future games. Anyway, time for peak, as the beast creates phantom wings out of lightning. There's lightning strikes everywhere. He flies around before slamming onto you. Then fire erupts from the ground, and the entire arena is turned molten and red.
Oh my god, he's so goddamn cool!
From now on, his moves are even bigger and flashier. His lightning slams now leave trails of delayed lightning strikes. His slams cause the ground beneath him to explode. Everything is heightened to the max, and I can't get over how awesome it looks. He even has an ultimate laser move that doesn't suck. Take that, plastered ass ringtone! It's hard to dodge since the first laser doesn't hit you, but its shockwave does, and the second laser is dummy thick, so you have to preemptively run to the side to get enough clearance. All of this is peak, except that it exaggerates one previous problem. You get even less openings to hit him. Sure, the moves look sick and are fair to dodge and predict, but he's so aggressive and constantly moves around, so trying to land a blow on his head can be a long waiting game of finding the correct opportunity and making sure you are positioning correctly. Even his big laser attack doesn't leave him open for much longer than his normal moves, especially since he might not even land right in front of you. The spectacle of all the moves can also be overwhelming and hard to learn the first time over, making it harder to appreciate them. There's also a couple that are just a little unclear. The massive lava shockwave he summons beneath you is unreasonably precise with a normal dodge, but easy with a jump. However, the splash from the lava is so tall, I don't know how you would ever consider that a jump would work. There's so much cool shit mixed with annoying shit that it really got me feeling like,
that's really dumb. But he's so cool! But that's so dumb!
at least we got the absolute gem that is Igon's speech.
Fuck you, Bayo! I hereby vow to beat your stupid bitch ass. Behold, this guy I found, and I, Kermit. Solid of scale you might be, foul bitch dragon, but I will riddle with holes your rotten ass with a hail of harpoons, with every last drop of my beam.
This is the closest they've ever gotten to another Medeer level dragon fight, but it still falls short. The extra visual flair looks amazing, but at the cost of his mechanics. I still enjoyed him, but he is not without frustration. B. Hey, you okay over there? Here, let me help you get that sword out of your everything. Oh, you got it? Oh, okay, cool. I was worried for a second. Is that normal? Ah! Midra is the final stop on your journey through the Abyssal Woods. And what a spectacular finale it is. As he has become a Lord of Frenzied Flame, same as you can do in one of the endings, his head becomes a ball of fire and can rapidly spew flames at you, which will build up frenzy. The fire effects are some of the best I've seen. They differentiate it well from Messmer's, as while his was bright red and intense but controlled, Midra's is yellow, sinister, and chaotic. The addition of more environments and enemies with frenzy was a needed addition, but a whole new boss is even better. The spookiness of the woods and manse continues here as Midra has many very unsettling moves and animations. He tends to levitate slowly around with certain swings and very slowly creeps around the arena. He only ever moves fast when going in for the strike. His attacks are both slow and sudden. The windups are long but have very deliberate momentum and rhythm that is very intuitive to follow. The melees are simple with different rhythms depending on the combo. Midra also leaves pretty blatant openings along with his slower attacks, so knowing when to be aggressive isn't too difficult. The fight is all about learning that rhythm and mastering the basic combos along with a couple of his fire spray attacks. It's basic but effective. The variety of different rhythms and combo chains are what keep him engaging and challenging. A giant frenzy explosion begins the second phase and coats the room in frenzy flame. He gains many new fire-based moves, but his core melee moveset is the same rhythm. The flame attacks are pretty intense either with his constant frenzy laser, or he may cover his sword in order to shoot waves of fire. Careful, he may try to stab you in the head with his sword, very violently. And even if you dodge it, it unleashes an AoE around him, so you have to be careful. There's not much else I can add. Midra is just an extremely terrifying, engaging, brutal, and memorable foe. I can't think of a single negative aspect of his fight, so he deserves an S.
Matter? Well, I hardly even know her.
The design is crazy unique and disgusting. Exactly what I expect from Miyazaki. The boss arena is even more surreal in visuals than the finger ruins with giant tubes suspended in the sky. The freakish nature of the creature does not always help the game mechanically though. Her melee attacks are mostly just her flailing her arms and head at you. It's more irritating than engaging, especially with how she jumps around. I'll at least give credit that she keeps her weak spot facing you, but on the off chance you do end up on her side, she rapidly slaps you around with her many finger legs. Oddly enough, this wave attack is one of the few where the version you get to use is actually better than the boss's version, considering hers is so slow. Meta will give birth to finger creeper enemies. They're not difficult to kill, but it is another annoyance that doesn't really add any depth. The Beyblade attack is irritating too because if you're not already either right next to her or 5 miles away, it becomes undodgeable. Why is there an invisible wall? Just put a cliff there or something, my god! Second form activates with an explosion that's slightly too big and adds in some extra annoyance to the moveset. These laser beams are fired slightly too close together, making the timing more precise than it needs to be for such a simple attack. But the ultimate move is what I hate the most. The giant rotating lasers may look cool, but this attack is pure luck on whether you can get around it or not. It rotates slightly faster than you can run, so you have to go around it. The obvious solution is to go under it as it's coming down at an angle. This can work, but you can only get so close to Meta due to her having a constant AoE around her. Meaning that if the laser ends up with a harsher angle down, you can't fit between the AoE, and so you're forced to take the hit. This isn't going to outright kill you unless you are out of flasks or something, but it still isn't fair to have forced damage. The boss only gets away without an F because of its surreal design, and most of its attacks other than the ultimate are fair, just annoying. D.
I have recently been informed that I have been saying Erdtree incorrectly. It is Erdtree. I am so sorry.
The base of the Erdtree looks metal as hell. You really get to see the scale of the tree along with how dark and corrupted it is. But of course, there's something lurking in the Skadoos. A flower sprouts from the golden goop. I don't know what it's supposed to be. It's as if the tree is defending itself. Come to think of it, what the hell is the Erdtree? I feel like out of everything in this game, I have absolutely no idea what the Erdtree represents or why it exists. But this isn't a lore video, this is a gameplay review, and the Plants vs. Zombies flower is pretty cool. It's made very obvious that the weak spot is the head. They keep the head pretty low after combos, so it is easy to reach. It is common for his attacks to end with him too close to you though, causing you to end up behind the head. Their attack windows can be small, so you have to account for this. Actually, how does it even move? It looks rooted into the ground. Hey, it's a stop destroying the trees! Aren't they you? Their melee swings are very loose and floppy, but have pretty heavy momentum, so you can anticipate the swing. One of their primary ranged attacks is summoning thorns beneath you. The hitboxes for the thorns are pretty small, but it's not made obvious where they are, so sometimes it's a little unclear where to dodge. The thorns do give a clear indicator below before they sprout, so timing it isn't hard. He seems like he doesn't have much health, but he will actually revive himself twice. Interestingly, this means this is the only boss in the DLC with 3 phases. They'll begin with a set of fast charge attacks, which must be dodged early to account for the speed. Don't know if he needs to be doing it 3 times in a row though. He has one of those annoying delayed beam attacks, but thankfully they can't overlay with other attacks. I guess because he's not an int build. His massive AoE explosion attack looks really cool, but it is very delayed, meaning you will guaranteed get hit by the first time. It does require you to pay attention, so I don't mind it too bad. He will then do a triple explosion as his last resort in the 3rd phase. The flower doesn't have a huge amount of moves, but they all fit the aesthetic of the Erdtree, and everything about this, from the environment to the boss design, is extremely memorable. B-. Look guys, it's someone's poorly disguised fetish! I say as if Miyazaki cares if I know what he's into. He puts in so many shots of feet. I'll admit, she is kinda slaying with the deeper red version of the Scarlet Rot. Sorry Melania, but you've been slacking. The particle effects and butterflies that fly around her also look amazing. And like Gauis, her attacks are mixed between her centipede body and melee weapon attacks. The melee attacks are pretty standard and make sense, but most of her attacks with her tail are just not intuitive to avoid. Her spin sweeps are so fast that you have to really thread the needle in order to not get hit by the second swipe. And in general, positioning with these attacks in a way that makes them dodgeable is just annoying. The problem is exemplified in the way she tends to move. She does move very much like how a centipede would, which, while thematic, is very confusing to try and read. She can really dart and weave all over the place very suddenly, so both dodging and attacking are difficult. I also think her strange shape, no offense I love all body types, contributes to some janky hitboxes. She shows some more promise in her stronger attacks, like her aerial slam, which gives a unique audio cue to indicate the timing. At the halfway point, she gains more flashy moves that utilize her scarlet butterflies. Her 3-swing combo that leads into a trail of explosive butterflies both looks intense and is well indicated. She can also create trails of butterflies and other attacks, so you need to pay attention to where they are, which adds a cool dimension to the fight. As you can guess, these do inflict Scarlet Rot, which is, you know... When you can figure her out, her issues can be mitigated, and most of her more flashy attacks are fun, but this still results in a pretty mixed experience. C.
Lord Brother. At long last you are returned. Tarnished one. Aspiring Lord of the Old Order. If you have known sin, if you grieve for this world, then yield the path forward to us. To I, Miquella, and my promised consort, Radahn.
Radahn is back for some reason, and is the final boss of the DLC. Without even going into anything about the fight yet, I find the choice to bring Radahn back very confusing. While I understand the appeal of fighting a prime Radahn, as his previous incarnation was infected with Melania's farts, I personally think it's disappointing for the final challenge of the game to just be a reskin. Now, of course, the fight mechanically is relatively different than base Radahn, but conceptually you can't expand much more from the abilities that Radahn already had. So despite being a different fight, it still has the same foundation, making it feel less original. And this isn't even getting into the lore implication and how this wasn't really built up or implied at all in the main game.
So you're telling me that Miquella sent his sister to go beat up Radahn, she fucked up, didn't actually kill him, rotted him instead, got dragged all the way back to the Erdtree by one really cool knight that she should probably make out with or something, and then Miquella let himself get nabbed by Mohg for some goddamn reason that I can't comprehend, and then lets Mohg have his way with him until he fucking died, and then his soul got transported to this other place, the Shadow Realm, and then he just hedged his bet that some tarnished guy or whatever was going to come by, kill Radahn, finish what Melania fucked up, and then somehow also find where the fuck Mohg was, because I don't know how you're supposed to find that place without some help. And you're going to kick his ass, and then you're also somehow going to survive all the other bullshit on the way there. And then he's got to put Mohg's body and then combine it with Radahn's somehow in a gate, but the gate was barred because it's behind his curse. Yeah, he got through without, or did he get there after you killed Messmer? Was he just hoping that you would also somehow follow him there, and then also kill Messmer, and then also kill Romina, and somehow find your way through all that bullshit at Ra, or however you say it, in order to burn that tree? And then somehow survive the gauntlet to get up to him? Or was he hoping you'd die by that point? Because he seemed kind of confused when you got there. He's like, yo, let me handle this. And I'm going to say, no, I seen his bullshit. I seen his grab. He's speaking nonsense in my ear, and I don't like it. I don't know what's going on anymore.
Reviving Radahn for this purpose feels lazy, and they didn't even use this as an excuse to give him a voice lines. I wonder what he'd sound like.
Yup, it's me, Radahn. You're probably wondering, how did I get here?
But enough about that. How does the fight feel to play? It generally does feel like a more fast-paced version of base Radahn. His moves aren't completely copy-pasted, but they have a similar flow with less wind-up. His moves are still well telegraphed, and the increased intensity of the combos are about as different as they can be from base Radahn, and still feel kind of new. I'm not really a fan of the rock projectiles. The tracking is slightly too strong, so you have to awkwardly juke them out, and even then it sometimes doesn't work. You can also jump it, but that's also awkward and doesn't really feel intended. When it comes to the pace though, it's honestly a little too fast. And I don't really mean so much the moves themselves, but just the amount of recovery in between each one. It really feels like there's only a few moves with guaranteed openings. And it's not like Rellana where her custom moveset gives potential for different openings. He doesn't really mix and match things up. He just does combos really quickly between each other. While I'm not incredibly impressed by the fight so far, there isn't anything egregious yet. But then we get to the one move you've all been waiting for, what I would consider worse than Waterfowl. The Cross Slash. It seems like a basic move, but it is practically undodgeable. It's such a simple move really. Radahn swings both of his swords in quick succession and then slashes them both at the same time. But the first two swings come so quickly that you can't dodge fast enough to go in between them. And you can't get out of the way with a normal roll due to how long his swords are. It's such an interesting design flaw in that you cannot dodge it without some external ability or help. I would go on more, but I think doing so would be unfair, as in a recent patch, they did slow this move down. It's actually really obvious they did because the animation is practically in slow motion. Them fixing this does at least confirm it was either a mistake or just a poor decision, but I think it speaks to the quality of everything else in this fight that something like this slipped through. Despite my rambling, the fight in first phase is very straightforward with not all that many moves to remember. Jumping into the second phase is what adds to the chaos. Same as most other bosses so far, his moveset remains the same but with a few added and the old moves are enhanced. In this case, it is Miquella who enhances each of his moves by sending Holy Light in front of every single one. I simultaneously like and dislike this. Mechanically, I do think it is a solid way to increase difficulty. The beams of light come out on a delay after each attack and only appear right in front of said attack. So it is basically a method of forcing you to position every dodge so you're out of view of the beams. Absolutely nothing wrong with that mechanically, but in execution, it is the visuals that hinder it. Point being, I can't fucking see. Every time he swings his sword, I get flashbanged. And then on top of all that visual clutter, you also have to deal with Miquella's long ass hair. It's so hard to learn the positioning of each attacks without proper vision. Once you do know where they go, it's more than doable, but it shouldn't be this hard to see. I'm also not a fan of how it staggers you. It can lock you into combos sometimes when I think the chip damage would be enough punishment. You don't need the stun too. Okay, on to new attacks. He usually, not always, starts the phase with a giant AoE beam. This is both annoying and not interesting to avoid. All you need to do is run out of the blast zone, but the radius is so big you have to book it the moment he starts prepping it, otherwise you get clipped. His grab attack is more of a lore move, but I have nothing really wrong with that. Grabbing you once does nothing, but if you got hit a second time with it, you fall under Miquella's charm. It's a cool showcase of Miquella's power, even if it is easy to avoid the actual grab. The rest of his moves center around the gimmick of him creating apparitions of himself to rapidly attack. Again, a cool concept, but again, it's so hard to see and understand. When he charges at you from the air, the ghosts all attack so quickly that you can't dodge through it. Now the intended solution, at least I believe, is to gain distance so the ghosts miss. But there is no reason for me to assume there is a limit to its range given how far they go by default, especially since the final swing does have infinite range. But then on the opposite end of the spectrum, his ground charge is deceptively simple, with you just needing to get behind him. And then we have the giant meteor smash from the original fight. But with the light of God, it covers the whole arena. Looks sick. How do I dodge it? Annoyingly, it's just to run to the opposite end of the room, but the pattern persists of cluttered visuals making gameplay unclear. Yet after all this complaining, once I got to the point where I did understand what his moves did, I was able to have some fun. On my first win, I resorted to using a great shield, but I actually had a ton of fun fighting him with the thrusting shield. I couldn't rely too much on blocking as the chip damage was high, but it helped mitigate the cross slash and getting overwhelmed by the holy beams. But I can't say the fight is well designed when it is so difficult to see and understand his moves, considering that is one of the main elements that makes Souls games interesting. I also want to wrap back around to my disappointment that not only is the final boss a reskin fight, but that Miquella feels so absent despite being on his back. Outside of adding the beams and effects, he doesn't really do anything. I get that his whole thing was that he controls other people to use their power, but I feel there were so many more interesting ways to incorporate that power into Radahn's moveset. What this all makes me realize is I don't want to fight Radahn, I want to fight Miquella. He is the antagonist and the central character to the DLC story. I want to see what he can do. I understand he'll need help, but show me how he uses that instead of him hiding behind his big hunky brother. To try and cap off my thoughts, the fight is mechanically interesting and fair, but visual clutter and unclear animations make it unfair to learn. Conceptually, the fight is disappointing both in refighting Radahn and in not getting to see Miquella do all that much. My feelings are so mixed that I would be tempting to give it a C, but the one caveat to that is that this is the final boss, the end cap to the journey. I don't hate it, but I expected more. D. But we're not ending this on a sour note. I said so earlier, but the boss quality has gone up. Less bosses, more consistency. Love it. What I really noticed in Remembrance Bosses is there was no F at all. Only 2 Ds. That's so much better than before. I was dishing out Fs galore in my original review, so I'm glad to see so little here. Even when talking about mini-bosses, there weren't that many Fs. Plus, we actually got 2 S-tier fights instead of just 1. I'm generally happy with the boss selection, even if there were some disappointments. Just like the original game, Shadow of the Erdtree is an absolute marvel of art, and it stands out as one of the best open-world experiences I've ever had in gaming. The weapons in combat felt like a step up from the base game, with creative weapons and spells that are worth going out of your way to get. The world design and graphics are absolutely stunning in scale and beauty. I only wish some of the lessons learned from their first open world carried over here. Items are thrown around randomly, and the field bosses are mostly copy-paste. The environment does feel more like one giant world, but there wasn't enough to fill it out. Dungeons, however, were greatly improved with more unique designs and quality over quantity. Enemies are roughly as good as the base game with equal new and old. NPC quests are the biggest letdown, with confusing objectives that are never clearly stated. But quests are probably the least impactful part of these games to begin with, so it isn't a huge loss. And finally, bosses are also improved upon with, again, more quality over quantity. Mini-bosses can still fluctuate, but the primary fights are all fun with only one real exception. This DLC is absolutely worth the $40 price tag, and is almost big enough to feel like a standalone game. From Software definitely got the message that it's better to focus on quality over quantity. Quality is still iffy in certain spots, but the experience is more consistent than the main game. If they ever decide to make another open world game, I think making it the size of this DLC would be a better approach. The size of this map along with the better design of the original map, it would be peak. Time to wrap things up. Here's the tier list of all of the different categories and bosses. And the experience as a whole gets... A! I like how I just wrote here, write more about Fire Knights. I'm not gonna do that. I guess I'm just gonna ad-lib it. I love killing midgets. I love railing midgets. I love fucking midgets. And then I just wrote more examples. God damn it. Oh, I didn't do Shadowkeep yet. I have to write that. Okay. I hate writing. I hate writing. Why do I do this? He's sucking me off!
Midra has many very unsettling moves and animations. God damn it.
Jesus. Okay.
She's so... Her three-swing combo. Met her? I hardly know her.
The first fucking sentence of this section is not grammatically correct!
Oh, dragon fuckers are gonna love this.
Hey, how's it going?
A spooky, scary skeleton riding a very... Who wrote this? I mean, I know I did, but, like, who wrote this? This is terrible!
Coming to the base. Coming to the base. I'm gonna come to your base. Mac and cheese.
Fuck. Get out. Okay. Come on. It's stuck. Door stuck. Okay.
Did you know that 2 Girls 1 Cup was fake? You see that fart smell over there? Yeah, he's a real one. Not even your 2 huge moons can get his attention, huh? Too bad, fart smeller. I don't care who your mommy is, you suspiciously broad twink. I'm still gonna plow her. I'm gonna kick your ass. If he's a skeleton, how the hell's he going through puberty? Ah, fuck, I read it wrong again. What do you mean he's bioluminescent? I don't see us glowing that much. Oh, wait, I read it wrong, too. What do you mean he's coalescing? He's perfectly oh, shit, I read it wrong again. Fuck! What the hell does immunofluorescent even mean? The sloppy sounds of Chad on Twink incestuous smooching.
Hey everybody, it's me, Radahn!
Oh no, not the voice crack. Oh shit.
Hey everybody, it's me, Skarsturge Radahn. I'm probably saying that wrong. You probably don't want to use that one.
I have a fucking bone to pick with you, first of all. Now you gonna have to tell me to behold my grandest blue orbs. That's insane. That's an insane sentence, but that's fine. Okay. Converge, guess. How the fuck do you say this word? Hang on. We're cooking. Give me a second. I tire of your pitiable squirming. I'm gonna start over. I'm gonna throw up. You want that one sensually, and I don't really, I am not a sexy person. So, clearly subpar compared. No, I'm just not sexy like that. I'm just not. Okay. I got self-conscious thinking that my roommate could hear me. For almighty Messmer's unquenchable. Wow. Anyways.